Okay, so AI in healthcare. I mean, it's everywhere you look these days.
It really is. It seems like every day there's a new breakthrough or application, and honestly, it can be a bit overwhelming trying to keep up with it all.
Exactly. That's actually why we wanted to do this deep dive today,
Yeah,
to try to cut through the noise and figure out what's really significant. We've got this mountain of research papers we've been looking at,
we do. We really dug deep into this.
and they cover so much ground. I mean, we're talking about how AI is being used to make diagnoses faster and more accurate, how it can create these amazingly detailed medical images, and even how it might change the way doctors and patients interact.
It's really remarkable stuff. We've got papers on AI's role in radiology, how it's changing the management of conditions like diabetes and dementia. We even found research on how AI is being used to analyze patient reviews and generate synthetic medical data.
All right, so like a real mix. And our mission here today is to sort of distill all that down, to find those key takeaways, those big trends, and figure out what it all really means without getting too lost in the technical weeds. So this is for anyone who wants to understand the AI revolution that's happening in healthcare without needing a PhD in computer science.
Exactly. We're going to try to make this as clear and engaging as possible.
Okay, so where should we even begin with all of this?
Well, how about we start with the idea of AI actually taking a more direct role in patient care, like actually making decisions. There's a really interesting paper by Yanjia and their team. They propose this concept of delegated AI autonomy.
Okay, delegated AI autonomy. So what exactly does that mean?
So it's basically about creating a system where AI could actually act on its own in certain patient cases, maybe those that are more straightforward and well-defined. But it's not about replacing doctors entirely, not at all. It's more about finding that sweet spot where AI can handle those routine tasks, and then human clinicians can step in for the more complex situations.
Right, so like AI could take some of the load off doctors, free them up to focus on those patients who need that human expertise.
Exactly. It's about smart collaboration, really harnessing the strengths of both AI and human clinicians. And they actually explore how this could be applied to an AI tool that's used to analyze tissue samples. It gives us a good example of how this might work in practice.
That makes sense. Sort of like AI being a super efficient assistant. That lets the doctors focus on the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Okay, but how about the way AI is changing those actual interactions between doctors and patients? We saw some research on that too, right?
Yeah, definitely. The work by Kaiwan Zuo and their team is really intriguing here. They developed this framework that uses LLMs, large language models.
LLMs, right? I've heard of those.
So they use these LLMs to create a system that can basically make medical consultations feel more natural, more like a conversation with a human doctor. And they really focused on two key things.
Okay, which are?
Well, the first is giving the LLM this huge vocabulary of medical terms so it can really understand and reason about medical information.
Makes sense. So it's not just throwing back random words it doesn't understand.
Right. And the second thing, and this is really crucial, is improving the LLM's emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence for an AI. That sounds tricky.
It is. But they tackled this by training the LLM on a massive amount of real-world conversation data. This way, the AI learns to pick up on those emotional cues and nuances that are so important in healthcare communication. Being able to respond appropriately to a patient who's anxious or upset. They even built this huge data set, over 800,000 consultation records from China.
Wow. So that's a lot of data to work with.
It is, and their findings were really promising. The LLM could engage in much more complex dialogues, even asking relevant follow-up questions. It really brought its performance closer to a human doctor.
I can see how that would make patients feel more heard and understood.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got AI potentially making decisions, AI helping with consultations. Where else are these LLMs having an impact?
Well, one area that's getting a lot of attention is clinical guidance and making workflows more efficient for healthcare professionals.
So AI helping the doctors themselves do their jobs better.
That's the idea. And there's this study by Julia Ive and her team where they explore whether LLMs could safely give clinical guidance.
Sounds risky. How did they even go about testing that?
So they built a chatbot based on the Llama 3.18b model,
Okay.
and then they trained it using the clinical guidelines from University College London Hospital. They wanted the chatbot to be able to quickly and accurately retrieve information from those guidelines.
So the chatbot wouldn't be making stuff up. It would be giving answers based on established medical guidelines.
Precisely. And the results were actually pretty encouraging. The chatbot's answers were almost always relevant to the questions, and it rarely missed important details from the guidelines. And it was fast, much faster than humans at providing those answers.
That sounds promising, like having an instant expert on hand.
Right. However, they did find that sometimes the chatbot added a little bit of extra information that wasn't really necessary. So there's definitely room for improvement when it comes to precision.
So it needs to be a little more concise, but
Mhm.
overall, it seems like it could be a useful tool. Now, we also came across this study that looked at the impact of AI on a very specific task, which was detecting brain aneurysms in medical images.
Ah, yes. The study by Tommaso Di Nodo and his colleagues. And their findings were a bit surprising. They did this multi-reader study with both junior and senior radiologists. They wanted to see if an AI model could help them spot brain aneurysms more accurately in angiograms.
So the AI would be like a second pair of eyes, maybe catching something that a human might miss.
Exactly. And initially, the AI model did really well on its own. But here's the surprising part. When the radiologists used the AI as a tool, it didn't actually improve their accuracy all that much.
Really?
Yeah, it was a bit unexpected. And not only that, but it actually increased the time it took them to read the images.
That's the opposite of what you'd want. I mean, you'd hope the AI would speed things up.
Right. And this study highlights something really important. Just because an AI model performs well in a lab setting doesn't guarantee it'll have the same impact in a real clinical environment. It's a reminder that we need to be careful about how we integrate AI and make sure it truly improves both accuracy and efficiency.
That's a good point.
Okay.
Moving on, we also looked at some research on using AI to actually generate those reports from the medical images.
Right. There's a paper by Xiaodong Zhang and their team. They developed this thing called MEP-NET, which stands for Medical Entity Balanced Prompting Network.
Medical Entity Balance Prompting Network. Wow, that's a mouthful. What's it all about?
So they designed it specifically for generating reports from brain CT scans. And brain CTs are really complex. You have all these different anatomical structures, different types of lesions, and they can appear anywhere in the scan.
So the AI has to be able to make sense of all that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they found that existing AI methods sometimes struggled with this, leading to reports that might miss important findings or be a bit repetitive. So MEPNet tries to solve this by making sure the AI pays attention to all those different medical entities in the scan without getting bogged down in any one area.
So it's like making sure the AI has a balanced approach, not missing any crucial details.
Exactly. It uses this thing called knowledge-driven joint attention, which is a way of understanding how those entities are related to each other. And it also has a learning status score, which keeps track of how well the AI is learning about each entity. And all this helps guide the LLM to generate those more comprehensive reports.
So it's basically giving the AI a more structured approach to analyzing those complex scans.
That's the idea.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I think it's time to dive into some of the specific areas where AI is being applied, like diabetes management.
Absolutely. Let's start there. Maria Panagiotou and her colleagues did some great work on this. They were investigating how AI could be used to improve those insulin recommendations and ultimately help people manage their diabetes better.
So instead of just a one-size-fits-all approach, AI could help tailor the insulin dosing to each person.
Exactly. They highlight how AI algorithms, particularly those that use reinforcement learning,
Reinforcement learning.
it's a type of AI that learns from trial and error, like getting feedback and adjusting its actions based on that feedback.
Okay, I see. So it's constantly learning and refining its approach.
Right. And this is well suited for insulin dosing because it can adapt to each person's unique glucose patterns, their diet, their activity levels, all of that.
That sounds pretty powerful.
It really does have a lot of potential. But they also stress that we need to be really mindful of things like data privacy and making sure these algorithms are transparent so both doctors and patients understand how they're working and can trust them.
Those are definitely important considerations. Now, we also saw how AI is being used to address a different kind of challenge, and that's data scarcity in ophthalmology.
Right. King-Shan Hao and their team introduced this framework called FundusGAN, which is specifically designed to generate high-quality, realistic images of the fundus.
The fundus. Remind me what that is again?
It's the back of the eye. And the thing is, to train effective AI models for diagnosing eye diseases, you need a ton of image data.
Right. So FundusGAN is like creating artificial images to fill that gap.
Precisely. And the cool thing is these aren't just random blurry images. FundusGAN generates really detailed images showing both the normal anatomy of the eye and those pathological features that are signs of different eye diseases.
So it's making sure the AI has a broad range of images to learn from, even if those real-world images are hard to come by.
Exactly. And they found that by adding these AI-generated images to their training data, they could significantly improve the accuracy of AI models for diagnosing all sorts of eye conditions.
Wow. So it's like giving those AI models a boost, helping them learn even when there's limited real-world data.
That's the power of this approach.
Pretty impressive. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about AI in dementia care. We saw some really interesting research on that.
Yeah, Yutong Song and their team developed this framework called DEMENTIA-PLAN. It's an agent-based system designed to provide conversational support for people in the early stages of dementia.
Conversational support, meaning it can actually talk to them.
In a way, yeah. It's designed to have natural-sounding conversations with patients. And what's really innovative about it is how it uses multiple knowledge graphs.
Knowledge graphs.
It's basically a way of organizing information to show how different concepts are related. So they have one knowledge graph focused on the patient's daily routines and another one on their personal memories.
Okay, so it's like having access to a lot of information about the patient's life and habits.
Exactly, and it uses that information to have more meaningful conversations. And there's this self-reflection planning agent that helps the system decide what information to draw on, depending on how the conversation is going. So it can help patients remember things, but also draw on those positive memories to help them feel better emotionally.
It sounds like a very thoughtful approach, recognizing that dementia is not just about memory loss, but also about those emotional challenges.
Right, and it's a great example of how AI can be used to provide really personalized support.
Absolutely. Now, we also saw some impressive work being done in India on detecting spinal pathologies using MRI scans.
Oh, yes. This is some really exciting stuff. Purgava Subramanian and a huge team of researchers developed this AI system that was trained on a massive data set of 2 million MRI spine scans.
2 million scans. That's a mind-boggling amount of data.
It is, and it allowed them to create a system that can detect 43 different spinal pathologies with really high accuracy. In some cases, almost 98% accuracy.
Wow. So it's not just good, it's incredibly accurate.
Yeah, exactly. And it works across different age groups, genders, even different MRI machines. They've even implemented this system in 13 healthcare organizations across India, where it's processing over 100,000 scans and helping to get those reports out faster.
So it's not just a research project, it's actually being used to help patients.
That's the best part. It's making a real-world impact. And this same group of researchers has also been working on another really important area, detecting intracranial bleeding in CT scans.
That sounds critical.
It is. Intracranial bleeding can be life-threatening, so being able to detect it quickly is essential. They developed a 3D convolutional neural network for this.
Okay.
And it performs really well. They're seeing accuracy and precision rates above 90% for identifying different types of bleeds in the brain.
So it's like having another expert set of eyes, but this time looking at those CT scans.
Exactly. And that can make all the difference in emergency situations, potentially saving lives.
That's amazing. Okay, let's move on to another specific application of AI. We saw some research on quantifying the Ki-67 proliferation index in breast cancer. What exactly is that?
Right, good question. So the Ki-67 index is basically a measure of how quickly cancer cells are growing.
Okay, and why is that important?
Well, it helps doctors decide on the best treatment plan. A higher Ki-67 index usually means the cancer is more aggressive. And traditionally, pathologists have to count these Ki-67 positive cells manually under a microscope.
Which sounds time-consuming and maybe even a bit subjective.
Exactly. So Deepti Madurai Muthu and her team are trying to automate this process using AI. They use the YOLAV8 object detection framework.
YOLAV8.
Yeah, it's known for being really fast and accurate at identifying things in images.
Got it.
So they train a system to identify and count those Ki-67 positive cells in digital images of tissue samples. And their model performed really well, achieving a high level of accuracy.
So this could potentially make those diagnoses much faster and more consistent.
Exactly. It's a really promising application of AI in cancer care.
Okay, so we've seen all these really impressive things AI can do in healthcare, but we also have to talk about the limitations. Right?
Absolutely. We can't just ignore those.
One thing we saw was this issue of overconfidence in LLMs.
Right. Nirma Naderi and their colleagues did this study where they evaluated how confident different LLMs were in their answers to questions about gastroenterology.
So, like, how sure the AI was that it had the right answer.
Yeah, and the concerning thing was that even those LLMs that performed really well overall tended to be overconfident, even when they were wrong.
So they might give an incorrect answer and present it as fact, which could be really dangerous in a medical context.
Exactly. It's a big challenge in making sure we use LLMs responsibly. We need ways to accurately assess when an AI doesn't know the answer and prevent it from giving misleading information.
Right, because in healthcare, you don't want to be taking chances with people's health.
Absolutely.
And then there's this whole issue of hallucinations in medical visual question answering systems.
Ah, yes. That's another important area of research. Zhui Liao and their team came up with this method called VASE, which stands for Vision Amplified Semantic Entropy.
Okay, vision amplified semantic entropy. What does that even mean?
It's basically a way to try to catch those incorrect or nonsensical outputs that these multimodal LLMs sometimes produce. They're these really powerful systems that can answer questions based on medical images, but sometimes they give answers that contradict what's actually in the image.
So it's like the AI is seeing things that aren't really there.
In a way, yeah. And VA tries to detect these hallucinations by making subtle changes to the image and seeing how it affects the AI's confidence in its answer. The idea is to make the AI rely more on the visual information, so it's less likely to make those mistakes.
Interesting. So it's sort of like a double check, making sure the AI is really paying attention to what it's seeing.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, another area where AI is making a lot of progress is in segmenting medical images, which, if I remember correctly, is about identifying and outlining specific structures within an image.
Right. And it's a crucial step in many diagnostic processes. Yeheng Zhang and his colleagues developed PG-SAM, or Prior Guided SAM, specifically for segmenting multiple organs in medical images.
Multiple organs, so it's not just focused on one specific area.
Exactly. Now, SAM, the Segment Anything model, is this really powerful AI that can segment objects in images it hasn't even been trained on.
So, like, it can figure things out on its own.
To some extent, yeah, it's pretty impressive, but it doesn't always work perfectly with those complex medical images. So PG-SAM tries to improve SAM's performance by giving it more context, more medical knowledge.
Okay, so it's like giving Sam a crash course in anatomy and physiology.
You could say that.
Yeah.
It uses LLMs to get that medical knowledge and then helps Sam better align that knowledge with what it's seeing in the image.
So it's make sure the AI understands the medical context, which leads to better segmentation.
Exactly. And it really works. PG-SAM achieves state-of-the-art performance in segmenting all sorts of organs.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And on that note, we also look at some research on unsupervised methods for segmenting biomedical images.
Right. Abdurraqid Hamrani and Anuradha Godavarty developed ADZUS, which stands for Attention Diffusion Zero-Shot Unsupervised System.
Attention Diffusion Zero-Shot Unsupervised System. Catchy name. What's it all about?
So this system is really cool because it uses self-attention diffusion models. Basically, it learns to segment those medical images without needing any human-provided annotations.
No annotations, meaning no one has to manually label the different structures in the image.
Exactly. It learns by understanding the patterns and relationships within the image itself.
That sounds like a huge time saver.
It really could be. And ADZUS has performed really well on a variety of segmentation tasks, from identifying skin lesions to spotting infections in chest x-rays.
It seems like it has a lot of potential, even though it does require a lot of computing power.
That's one of the current limitations. It needs a lot of processing power to work its magic. But the benefits of not needing those annotations could be really significant.
Okay, I see that. Now, shifting gears a bit, we also saw how AI is being used to leverage existing data in new ways and explore different approaches to healthcare research.
Absolutely. Like the work by Thomas Monks and his colleagues, they were looking at how to use generative AI to reconstruct those healthcare simulation models from the descriptions you find in research papers.
Healthcare simulation models, what are those exactly?
They're these detailed models that researchers use to simulate different scenarios, like how a hospital might respond to a sudden influx of patients or how a new treatment strategy might affect patient outcomes.
Okay, so they're like virtual experiments, but for healthcare systems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the problem is often those models themselves aren't shared publicly. So this team used AI to try and recreate those models based on what was described in the research
Not
papers.
like reverse engineering those models using AI.
You could put it that way, and it actually worked. They were able to generate and test two different models based on the descriptions.
Really? That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It shows that we can potentially unlock a lot of value from those past research efforts, even if the original models aren't available.
That makes sense. It's like giving those research efforts a second life.
Right.
And on the topic of making the most of existing data, we also looked at how even smaller medical data sets can be useful for fine-tuning LLMs.
Yeah, that's the work by Noah Losh and his team. They were focused on text classification and normalization tasks using cardiology reports and patient discharge summaries.
Okay, so like categorizing those documents and extracting key information.
Exactly. And what they found was that you can actually achieve pretty good results by fine-tuning smaller LLMs using relatively limited data.
So you don't always need those massive multi-million-dollar data sets.
Not necessarily. They were able to get comparable results using just a few hundred examples.
That's good news for areas where collecting large amounts of data is difficult or expensive.
Absolutely. It makes these powerful LLMs more accessible to a wider range of researchers and institutions.
I can see how that would be really helpful. Now, another cool way AI is being used to leverage existing data is through this thing called experience retrieval augmentation.
Yes, XPRAG, as it's called. It was proposed by Justice O and their team. It's basically a way to enhance the reliability of LLMs when they're used for medical reasoning tasks.
Okay, so how does it do that?
Well, let's say you're using an LLM to assess the quality of a patient's discharge summary. Instead of just relying on the LLM's general medical knowledge, XPRAG goes a step further. It searches through electronic health records, specifically those past discharge summaries from other patients with similar conditions.
So it's like looking for similar cases to provide more context.
Exactly. It retrieves relevant information from those past cases and feeds it to the LLM.
Giving it more specific examples to learn from.
Right. And this really improved the LLM's performance, making its assessments more accurate and reliable.
It's almost like the AI is learning from the experience of all those past patients.
That's a great way to put it.
Pretty impressive. And speaking of learning from experience, we also saw how LLMs are being used to analyze something completely different: online patient reviews.
Oh yeah, that's the work by Sharon Zhu and their team. They used LLMs to analyze Google Maps reviews of urgent care facilities.
Google Maps reviews. I wouldn't have thought of using those for research.
Right. It's a really interesting approach. And they were able to extract some really valuable insights about what drives patient satisfaction in those settings.
Like what? What were the main things people cared about?
Well, surprisingly, the biggest factors were interpersonal interactions with the staff and the efficiency of the clinic.
Yeah.
You know, things like wait times.
So it wasn't just about the quality of the medical care itself.
That's what they found. Those human elements, those aspects of feeling cared for and valued really made the difference.
It goes to show that those often overlooked aspects of healthcare can be just as important as the technical side of things. Now, one final area we wanted to touch on was the evaluation of AI-generated medical images. You know, making sure those images are actually good enough to be used in a clinical setting.
Right, that's really important. David Wong and a large team of researchers developed this framework called GAZEL for that.
GAZEL. What is that?
It's basically a way to assess the realism of those synthetic medical images, but they go a step further. Instead of just relying on computer algorithms to judge the quality, they use eye tracking data from expert radiologists.
So they're seeing how those experienced radiologists actually look at those images where their eyes focus.
Exactly. And they found that even some AI-generated images that looked realistic according to those computer metrics were often flagged as fake by the radiologists.
Really? So those human experts could spot the difference.
It seems so. It highlights the fact that those computational metrics don't always tell the whole story. We still need that human expertise to make sure those AI-generated images are truly clinically useful.
That's a good point. And finally, we saw this system called MedPlan, which is designed to do something pretty ambitious: generate personalized medical plans for patients.
Yes. This was developed by Xinling Su and their team, and it's based on this two-stage approach using retrieval augmented generation.
Retrieval augmented generation. Okay, break that down for me.
So the system is designed to create those plans following the SOAP methodology, which is a standard approach in clinical practice.
SOAP, what's that stand for?
It stands for Subjective, Objective, Assessment, and Plan. Basically, it's a way of structuring the patient's information and the proposed treatment plan.
Okay, that makes sense.
So MedPlan first generates a clinical assessment based on the patient's information, and then it uses retrieval augmented generation to go through the patient's medical history and come up with a personalized treatment plan.
So it's not just giving a generic plan, it's actually tailoring it to the individual's needs and past experiences.
Precisely. And the results show that this approach led to more accurate assessments and better treatment plans overall.
That's really impressive. It's like having an AI assistant that can help doctors create those really tailored treatment plans.
That's the idea.
Well, I have to say, this has been an incredibly fascinating deep dive into the world of AI in healthcare. It's clear that AI has the potential to transform almost every aspect of healthcare, from diagnoses to treatment to those everyday interactions between doctors and patients.
I completely agree. It's really an exciting time to be following this field.
But as with any powerful technology, we have to be thoughtful about how we develop and implement AI, making sure those algorithms are validated and that we address those ethical concerns around data privacy and transparency. And we have to remember that AI is a tool. It can augment human expertise, but it can't replace it entirely.
I think that's a really important point. It's about finding that right balance, that collaboration between humans and AI to create the best possible healthcare system for everyone.
And I think that leads us to the big question we should all be thinking about. With all these advancements happening so rapidly, how will AI shape the future of healthcare? How will it impact that crucial doctor-patient relationship? It's a lot to consider. And hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought and maybe even sparked your interest in exploring some of these topics further.
I hope so. It's an ever-evolving landscape, and there's so much more to discover.
Well, thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Until next time.